Over 60 million men, women, and children dead. Some of the largest cities in the world reduced to rubble. The economy of an entire continent decimated. This is the setting of Europe after World War II. It is up to the victors of the war to rebuild the continent. Of the victors of World War II, only the United States escaped with its economic infrastructure entirely unscathed, and therefore was in the best condition to start rebuilding their European allies. It was in the United States where the rebuilding was proposed, and the seeds of the Cold War were sown. In a speech to Harvard University, Secretary of State George Marshall proposed a system of recovery for Europe, backed by the United States. The U.S. leapt into action and invited most European countries to discuss how to rebuild at a conference in 1947. This conference is where it all went wrong. The USSR, especially Joseph Stalin's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vyacheslav Molotov, distrusted American interests in reconstructing the European economy. Molotov, with the blessing of Stalin and the rest of the Soviet hierarchy, pulled out of all discussions regarding the rebuilding of the European economy, taking with them much of the newly communist portions of Eastern Europe, including Poland and East Germany. This break between the USSR and Western Europe is the true end to the alliance of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. However, while the Cold War blossomed, the United States and Western Europe finally arrive at a plan for reconstruction, the Marshall Plan. Dubbed in honor of the Secretary of State who had conceived it in a Harvard speech, the Marshall Plan would be in effect from April 3, 1948 until 1952. The plan called for monetary stimulus to Western European nations in the form of loans and grants from the United States via the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD. The majority of this funding went to the industrial states of Europe, including the United Kingdom, France, and West Germany. This stimulus was extremely effective, so much so that by the time the Marshall Plan ended in 1952, the industrial capacity of Western Europe was 35% higher than pre-war levels. But how were these loans utilized? Certainly the Marshall Plan was not solely responsible for the stunning recovery of the continent's economy, but it did facilitate it. For example, post-war France began an economic recovery plan known as the Monet Plan. The Monet Plan was based on detaching the coal and steel-rich Saar and Ruhr areas of Germany to create French industrial protectorates. It would use those natural resources in combination with the Marshall Plan's loans as the spark to reignite the French economy. Though the Soviets rejected the Marshall Plan, they embraced a very similar plan which can be said to have been inspired by it, the Molotov Plan, named for its creator, Vyacheslav Molotov, the original rejecter of the Marshall Plan. It incorporated not only the USSR, but also all of its Eastern European satellites. They even created an analog to the OECD by creating the Council of Mutual Economic Assistance, or Comecon, which would last until the end of the Cold War. The Marshall Plan's effects cannot be overstated. Not only did it kickstart the European economy in both Western Europe, directly, and in Eastern Europe by inspiring the Molotov Plan, but its implementation shaped the next 40 years of policy in Europe. It is not unreasonable to say that without the Marshall Plan, relations with the Soviet Union would have stayed relatively warm, and the Cold War would have been averted entirely. Regardless, it is safe to say that the Marshall Plan is one of the most significant historical actions in history.